Hey guys, sorry, having a rough night. So, hi. I wanted to go over a few things with you, especially for my at-home people, but even for my other folks, just because we're in a situation where I'm going to be bouncing back between the rooms, so it's going to be a little bit challenging in a good way. Right. So I wanted to go over a few things with you guys just to get us started. For my at-home people, hey, how you doing? And then for my people that are at school, but maybe in this moment I'm out of the room and you wanted to review what I went over, or you're at home at this point, the class is over and you can't remember something that I said. The technique's pretty simple, but we're gonna talk about some things. So things that I want to make sure that I cover. So if I forget to say these things, I'm hoping between the video and class time that I cover everything, and anything that I forget in the video, if I remember to say it during class, that I will let my at-home people know. But let's talk a little bit about safety with clay. So clay has 6 stages. Six stages. So this right here is what we think of clay, and this is plastic stage. There's also slip, which is watered down clay. So like this gooey mess, which has got things in it that should not be in there, is slip, plastic. There's a stage called leather hard, and that is when the clay has started to firm up, but is not totally dry yet. I have some pieces that I made the other day in my first demo attempt. So this is leather hard. So this is really pretty firm, but the clay color is still dark, like it's pretty much the same color as this, which means that it's not dry yet. When it's dry, it will get very light. And I'll show you that in a second. And then there is bone dry, which is often also referred to as greenware. It's bone dry if it's just clay. It's greenware if it's a finished piece and it's dry but not fired. Bisqueware, which is work that's been fired but not glazed. And then glazeware, where it's been glazed and fired for the final firing. Those are the 6 major stages. So when your clay is plastic, or when it's slip, or when it's leather hard, it's fine because there's still moisture in it, and the particles that are breathable are contained in the moisture. But when we allow the clay to dry, then if we allow that dust to enter the air, then it is breathable, and clay contains a chemical called silica. Silica is what sand is made of, but it's large and granular, it's not powdery. Airborne silica is very bad for your lungs. So even in a semester when we aren't dealing with coronavirus and we aren't going to be cleaning like mad because of that, we want to clean like mad because of the clay. So we want to make sure that we're washing our tools when we're done, that we're keeping our area clean, that we're wiping everything up, that we're bagging things that could dry out. If something gets dry, we either can, depending on the size of the piece of clay, you can choose to just throw it away, or you can recycle it. You can re-soak clay and rehydrate it and use it again, pretty much over and over again until it gets fired. The properties of it will change a little bit. Like if something got totally dry and you soak it, when you first start using it, it'll be called, it's a texture that's referred to as short, which means that when I bend it, it will break very quickly. Basically, the more I can stretch something, the more it's referred to as plastic. So this clay is nice because it's actually recycled clay. It's a combination of clays, and it never got dry, so it's been just sitting in a bucket percolating for a while. So our clay. So, and then I have this is my studio. This is a rented studio that I just moved into a few months ago. And so I made myself a nice table with an unfinished plywood. And that makes a really nice surface for working on because your clay doesn't stick to it, but I can still clean it. Another really great surface for that is like a piece of drywall where you tape the edges of it so the plaster doesn't get mixed in with the clay, or hardy backer board, which is concrete tile backer that you can get at any home improvement store, and I think it's 3 feet by 5 feet piece runs about $13 or $14. This is considerably more expensive, but it's a little nicer. Hardy backer works. And then if you don't have anything like that, you can always put a piece of canvas or another piece of fabric on top of a table surface. If your table surface is really non-porous, like really sealed, the more sealed it is, the more your clay is going to want to stick to it. It's the porosity that helps it to not stick. So if you have a piece of canvas, that's great because canvas is heavier, so it doesn't tend to move very much. An old tablecloth that you don't mind getting stained. Any fabric will work, but the thinner it gets, the more easily it's going to pull up with the clay rather than staying down. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about is wedging. So wedging is when we push the clay, we knead it essentially. And especially if you're recycling your clay, you're doing this to make sure that the consistency is even and that you work out any air bubbles. So we're going to do what is referred to as a ram's head wedge. I've heard it called other things. I can never remember the other things whenever I'm trying to come up with it. But I've also heard people refer to it as like a duck face wedge. And that's because when I push it out, it all kind of depends on the angle that you're looking at it. So like if you're looking at it like that, you know, it can kind of look like a duck. It can look a little more like a ram or a bull. I don't know. So when I do this, I'm pushing it. Oh, that definitely looks a little more bull. I'm pushing it in, right? I'll have to do this, but I need to kind of hold it in while I push it down. So I'm holding it in. I'm going to try to pull my hand up so you can see what I'm doing. I'm pushing it down just a little bit, so short strokes until it has that kind of face. So, and then I'm pulling it back up so that it's pointed towards me, and I'm pushing it back down again. Up, down, up, down. And I'm holding it in so it doesn't keep growing this way. So I just want to do that until it feels fairly consistent, and that's different from everybody. The mistakes that I can make on this, the biggest one that people do is they tend to think that pushing it further does more. You push it like all the way out here. Now I've stretched it so thin here, I have no way of basically putting this back without actually folding air into it, which is exactly what I don't want to do. So I'm going to do that. So if I'm hand building, I can get away with wedging pretty lightly. If I'm throwing, I want to wedge my clay pretty well. If I'm using recycled clay and I'm throwing, I want to wedge it like I'm mad. I want to make sure it's really nice and even. So these are going to be pinch pots, so I'm going to stop there. And I forgot to say, when you're cutting clay off of your block of clay, or just cutting your clay into smaller pieces, a wire tool, piece of wire with handles. This is kind of a fancier one. I wanted a shorter one. I like the shorter ones. It's personal preference more than anything. It's basically like a cheese slicer. Just pull it through your clay, separates, boom. So I have one little hole there, but otherwise that looks pretty good. Wedging. All right. So I stopped the video there for my people that are throwing, so I could use the wedging video for both. Alright, so I want to make some pinch pots. Put my stool over so I'm a little more comfortable. I hope I have this camera angle right. If I don't, I'm gonna cry later. Alright guys, so I've been having an out-of-body experience, by the way, here today. Not literally, but I've been having a very strange experience. My studio is in a building that has a recording studio too. And if you've never heard somebody record just part of something, for instance, just the vocals with no instruments, you know, they're listening to the instruments, but I don't hear the instruments. And I just hear a guy over and over and over again singing about how he doesn't care. It was interesting. All right, so pinch pots, I'm going to start with my clay in a basic ball shape. It doesn't have to be a very big piece. It kind of depends on how big I want the overall piece to be. My limit is about like this, because one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to push my thumb down to the bottom of this, and you can see my fingers are not terribly long, so the biggest the ball of clay can really be is about that big for me to get down towards the bottom of it. So I'm going to cut this in half. So I stop. When I push down, I'm going to stop when it feels like I'm about there. Now it's easy when I'm showing you from a cutaway, but you can kind of feel when you're getting close to your other fingers when you're on the inside. And then one of the things that I'm going to do, like once I'm in there, is I'm going to start pinching the bottom. And I'm going to work my way all the way around. And I'm going to move up a little bit. And I'm going to do it again. And again. And I'm going to slowly push the clay up. And basically, each stage that I'm doing, I'm compressing it until it's about the same thickness as that bottom. Just put this back together. Nice thing about pinch pots is if you have little bubbles, you usually squeeze them out in the process. So, down until I'm about that thickness. And then I'm pinching around on the bottom. So I've had a couple areas that I squished my two halves back together, and now I've got all these joints because I didn't wedge it again because I was lazy. So I've got a little area that wants to split. So I'm going to go ahead and push that back together really well. I'm going to go ahead and smooth that back together. So I'm going to pinch on the bottom and work my way up. Anything starts to crack. If it seems like it's drying and cracking, that's a whole other thing. So if anything starts to just crack, I'm going to blend it back together. Like maybe my ball wasn't really totally a ball. It had a folded over area that's exposing itself now. And I'm going to slowly work my way up. Now, I have a sponge that I'm going to dampen. Now, if I start to dry out my, it's way too wet, but you know, but it's not prepared. If I start to feel that my hands are drying out the clay, then I'm going to dampen my fingers and do that. I don't feel like that's happening, but I wanted to address that in case it starts to happen to you. So pinching is actually closest to throwing on the wheel. Because when you're throwing on the wheel, you start out pinching the bottom of the pot and it spins it for you. So I'm pinching and I'm having to spin it by hand and pinch an area at a time. And I'm going to leave finger marks because, you know, it's not mechanical, it's hand. So I'm going to push this a little bit faster. So a little bit up. So on your on your pinch pots, getting ahead of myself, I want these to be textured. They do not have to be the most amazing pieces ever. but I do want them to be textured. I want them to be a little bit bigger than this. I started with too small of a ball of clay. So I'm gonna pinch this up until it feels nice and even. If it starts to split or crack, I'm gonna blend it together. And the hard part with this is now, see, this clay's a little soft. It didn't hurt that this hand got really wet. And it's slowly letting the water kind of seep into the clay. Not a lot, but you know, my clay was kind of perfect, and now it's a little wetter than perfect. So now it's a little bit soft. So I'm just gonna try to work this out a little bit. Make sure that I'm pretty even all the way around. And I'm gonna let that sit for a little bit. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and start the second one. And then I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger, and we'll come back to that. I'm gonna turn off the video for now, guys. All right. I'm gonna show you guys this real quick before I let these rest again. I started my second pinch pot, and then I decided that I'm not doing a pot. And yours don't need to be pots. One of our really good reasons for doing 2 quick pinch pots before we start on our coil pot project is that glazing is a really important aspect of pieces, and to give you larger pieces to start glazing with, and to have no idea what you're doing with the glazes is a little intimidating. So the pinch pots are your chance to play with those glazes. So I want to actually I'm going to kind of squish this a little bit. This is what happens when I talk and work at the same time. I want to bring it back in a little bit. And I meant to do that while I was doing that last bit, but I can still do it now. So with this palm, I'm pushing in, and then that's compressing it, and I'm re-pinching it and trying to pull it this way instead of out as much as I can. There's going to be a point where I can't. I say for the purposes of the pinch pots right now, there are techniques for bringing it back together that involve cutting it and pulling it back together. If you've ever sewn, darting is a term in sewing. You do the same thing with clay. For the purposes of the pinch pot, I want you to show a little control. So if something has gotten out of control, abandon it and start another one. Because these are meant to be kind of quick projects. But I do want you to start to feel some control over the clay. So one of the mistakes that people make sometimes is they'll pinch this area too thin. And that tends to dry very quickly then, and tends to break and just does nasty things. So beware of that. It's the same with throwing. You want to not pinch that edge too thin. So with this, I don't want to pinch it too thin either. So I want this to be pretty even. All right, so I want to show you bringing it back in a little bit, trying to. It's still kind of pot-like. So instead of doing it on its, I'm gonna do it on its side. Kind of looks a little bit like a face. I get a little silly sometimes when I'm doing quick pieces. So yeah, he might get a nose. I don't think he'll get eyes, but he'll get some nostrils. All right, so that's gonna sit and firm up. Shite. We'll come back to that in, well, I'm not sure how long, but it's gonna sit until I'm ready to video it again. Then we'll come back. All right, guys, this isn't as firm as I would like it to be, but I'm tired and I want to push forward. So this is firmed up a bit. It's definitely, I'm not gonna squish it just by grabbing a hold of it. If it were really soft, grabbing it by this in one hand and, pushing in to pick it up is probably would not be the best idea. So it's a lot firmer. So a couple of things. I want to, I may want to smooth it. I do want you to have texture on these, but if you don't like the finger texture, I actually really like the finger texture, but if you want to smooth it, actually I'm gonna leave, I always leave the finger texture on. Let's break out of the norm. So if I want to smooth it, then these are Metal Rib of Death is a great tool for that because it's got a really smooth side, and I'm using it kind of like, think about spreading butter on toast. That angle, and you're trying not to tear the toast, right? So pressure, but not too much pressure. If my clay were firmer, I would use a little more pressure, but so I can start to really push that together. Like that. And I can keep going and get it really, really smooth. But I want texture on these. Let me do this just a little more. So I want you to create texture on these in 2 different ways. And there are more ways, but I want you to stick with these for these pinch pots. I want these to be pretty quick. So 1, press things into it. So I have just a skinny popsicle stick here, right? And I'm gonna do these little scalloped edges. And I could really see that like just covering the entire thing. That's a really nice consistent texture. Or I could vary it a little bit. Because it's my demo piece, I'm going to do something completely unrelated on it. So I can press just a pencil point in here, make little dots. So when I'm deciding on the thickness of these, I have to remember that I am going to be pushing things into it, and I'm going to potentially be carving things out of it. I would like you to use both techniques a little bit. So I'm going to count, not that as carving, but I'm going to count line work as carving. So if I were to use my pencil to draw, instead of just pushing it, then we'll count that as carving. So it's not really carving, but it is pushing the clay up on either side. Now when this gets firmer still, because the inside is still pretty soft, I'll brush those bits away. I have a piece that got a little too firm. I'm re-softening it just a little bit to see if I can show you how that would work. So boom. But you can draw whatever you want. I'm just doing patterns, I'm just playing. So like anything that's handy, experiment a little bit. But one of the biggest reasons for us to create texture on these is texture is your friend. It makes the surface more exciting. It makes it more energetic. It hides a multitude of flaws if your form isn't perfect. The more imperfect your form is, the more aggressive your texture should be. Like, you want to try to hide a shape from me? It's a good way to do it. Or at least I will applaud your effort. Okay. So I have this nice textured piece of wood. I'm pressing from the inside. I'm getting that because this is still pretty soft, so if I just tried to like smack it, I'm gonna flatten it. So I'm not gonna just work my texture in. So I'm pressing from the inside, I'm kind of rolling it as I go, and I'm picking up some of that, and it's kind of fun. Actually kind of like the way that's going. So that's that guy. He's lost his mouth a little bit, but I can squish him back down a little bit. And then, so we did the drawing with the pencil. You could also Trying to think of what tools you guys will have. Not at all, but I can use the edge of this. I could, if I really wanted to, carve bits of that out. Yeah. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that on Monday or Friday. So those of you at home, anything that you have at home that seems like it would work. If you just have a rough surface on something that you want to try digging at it with, you can do that. Or again, you can just use a pencil or an old ballpoint pen or something to draw into the surface. And you could draw literal pictures if you wanted to. I'm not there today. So, and then please, please, please make sure you sign your pieces. So a pencil is a really great way to sign it. All right, you would not think it would be so hard in my personal studio to find a needle tool. So people will tend to want to write their names with the needle tool. And it'll work, but it leaves lines that when this is fired, it's really, really sharp. So a pencil with a nice kind of slightly rounded tip tends to leave a much smoother line and also a wider line, so that when it's this is still too soft, when it's glazed, won't get filled in as easily. So let's go here. This guy. So this one is one that, so it got a little too firm. I didn't make it back in. This was my original demo that I made, and I didn't like it. And I don't mind the piece. I didn't like the video. There's nothing worse than seeing yourself on video sometimes. So, but I left it longer than I thought I was going to, so it got a little harder than intended. So this is pretty firm, but the surface has still got some give to it. So now when I carve, get a little soft, I can brush that stuff away a little more easily. That's not leaving as nice of a line as I would like. So let's do that. I've had way too much caffeine today, guys. That. Right. So when I sign, let me smooth it out a little bit. So sign, brush away your extra bits, go from there. Okay. So texture, pressing things in, or drawing or carving. If you find a way to carve, you can do that. I've made little tools for myself. I have little tools that do that, but I'm trying to think of what you guys have right now in your kits, and I don't think I have anything good for carving that I have enough of to give everybody one. We are supposed to get some wooden tools that are like modeling tools, that some of them might have scoopy ends that would be good for that, but I don't know if we're going to have them in time for these. So what am I looking for in terms of grading our pinch pots? So every project gets 2 grades, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that sometimes things are just really, really nice in the clay form, and then when we glaze them, like I've got all this really delicate texture, and it's really lovely, but if I use the wrong glaze, I'm gonna fill that all in. And sometimes that can be really cool because the glaze is nice enough that I don't care that I did all that work and I filled it in. Or maybe I don't have the subtlety of texture here, but I get color differences in those areas because the glaze is thicker where it dips down. So this is the fun thing about doing a lot of texture on these pieces for using for glazing, is you're gonna find out what the glaze does. The other reason is that, you know, especially with our current situation and the fact that we might be bouncing back and forth from home, is that sometimes things get broken, right? And I want you to have an extra cushion of a grade before that happens. So it also gives you a lot more grades so that you have some progress to show when we hit midterm and like not too many things are glazed fired yet, because it takes a while for things to dry. We have to bisque fire them, then we glaze them, and then we fire them again. Okay, so enough of that. What am I looking for in a pinch piece for a good grade? So I'm looking for a consistency in thickness. For a piece this size, really this should be the same thickness on the sides as it is on the bottom. You might have it just ever so slightly thicker on the bottom so that maybe it sits upright, but you know, a little bit of a flat edge will do the same thing. You know, you can always just create that. And it should never be a lot thicker. I shouldn't pick it up and immediately feel like it's bottom heavy. I also shouldn't feel like it's so heavy that I could use it to kill somebody. We have, almost all of us have grown up with some sort of ceramic objects in our house, whether it's a cheap dollar store mug or anything like that. We have a sense of how heavy something this size should be. And probably in its like plastic stage, it's gonna be about the same weight, maybe just a little bit heavier than it will when it's fired and then glazed and fired. Because it's gonna dry, it'll lighten up then, but then we're gonna add another layer of thickness to it and we're gonna fire it again. So we're gonna make it thicker again. So I want a nice shape, like an overall shape. I want you to show control. I want it to be an even thickness. I want you to have cleaned up the areas like here. Like, can you guys see that? So my line got muddled. And it's basically the stuff that got pushed up on the side because this clay is still a little wet. Instead of getting cleaned away, let's see if I can blend it a little bit, make it look nicer. Well, I fixed the one area and I just completely screwed up the other. Instead of it getting cleaned away, it just got pushed back onto it. So any of these little areas where stuff is sticking up unnecessarily, now texture is good, and it's okay if things are rough looking, but when I have like the stuff that's pilled where it's just kind of got pushed up on either side and it's formed a ridge that's fairly fine, right now it feels fine, but when it gets fired, it's going to be sharp. So I want to clean that stuff up. I don't have to do it right now. I can wait until it's like this guy, and this guy is hard, but not dry. I'm going to show you what a dry piece looks like, because definitely not dry. So, you have it there. That's right. So I got my other little fox. I have another one that's in the photo shoot thing. Got some little crumble bits. So some roughness is okay, right? But I just don't want anything to be really like jagged, because it will be sharp. So color difference. This is the same clay. Leather hard, bone dry. So this is firm, but it's still got a lot of moisture. See, I didn't clean up my signature very well, so that. So this stuff, let me try to make some sharp areas here. So like that stuff. Blah. And I really don't like that that's on there. I'm blending it with the back of my nail a little bit, but one thing I can do when it's this firm is I can go over it with a damp sponge and just kind of buff it really quickly. And the crumbly bits are gonna go away. And I wanna check it still. I wanna make sure nothing like kind of restuck. Crumbly bits are gonna go away. If I have an edge that's, like I don't like that edge right there. It kind of comes under a little bit. I can soften that a little bit. It's just a little bit of a sharp edge. And I like to avoid super sharp edges on the tops of bowls. Like if it's a really square edge, my glaze, so we'll say we'll use this as an example. My glaze won't really stick to here or here. It'll break away from it. So I want to avoid really super sharp edge. It can still have like a squarish edge, but I want it to just be the slightest bit rounded. Not, this is way rounded. But so yeah, I can sponge it. When it's here, I can like rub stuff off of it. Like I can't do that with these yet because I'll push stuff into my grooves instead of cleaning stuff away from it. But I want to clean that stuff up. Yeah, and I want them to be about 4 inches at least in one direction. Let's see how well I did. So slightly shy. Close enough. I would not dock you guys on that. But what I don't want is like, I mean, this is a nice size actually. I could do 2 of these really quickly instead of doing one bigger one. But I don't want you to get caught up in doing too small of things. Let's say 3 inches instead. I'm going to change that to 3 inches. I'll adjust it on the assignment. You guys won't even know until you hear this tape. So I don't want itty bitties. I want you to show that you have enough control to get it a little bit bigger and do that without it like cracking apart at the top. So remember to fix it along the way. You know, it doesn't have to have like a super even edge or anything like that, but the edge has to be clean. It just has to look intentional. And I can tell if it's intentional or not, believe it or not. All right, that's it. I think I know I'll realize I forgot something, but for now,